Hi, my name is Soleil and welcome back to the Little Reader's Corner. Today we are talking about poetry. Poetry, my dear Watson, poetry. So, I am not a poet. I am in a poetry class right now, Divinatory Poetry, but I am not a poet. I have tried. It's just not my forte. I like writing long fantasy and science fiction books and not poetry, but I really enjoy reading poetry. One, because, I mean, let's just be honest, you get through them pretty fast. There's not a lot of pressure. There's usually a lot of poems in one book. Sometimes they're difficult to understand, but other times you get a certain feeling from them and you're like, yeah, that's a poem right there. Okay, look at that poem. And that is a feeling we all enjoy. Not all of us, but like if you clicked on the video, maybe you do enjoy it, you know? So there's one poet whose work I absolutely adore, and that is Courtney Peppernell. I've read a lot of her work, so that is a little featured in this, but I don't know, one of those things where it's like really straightforward poetry and they're short and it just kind of gets to you. But we'll get into that. Let's talk about some poetry. First up, we have Ascend, which is written by Janica Stuckey. So this book was actually written while the author was in a trance-like state for, I think, like 20 days. And there are also rituals they were going through and intermittent fasting. So this is one of the books I'm actually reading for my Divinatory Poetics class. And it's rooted a lot in Jewish mystical traditions. So that's kind of a theme that plays throughout it. But the way that the synopsis kind of describes this book, I think, is the best way to summarize it, because it's really hard to summarize what poetry, especially a collection, is really about. So let me read that for you. This book-length poem drafts a surreal mythological landscape in which maximalist language shreds the natural world. I could not have said it better myself. I really couldn't have. So it kind of brings in apocalyptic devastation as well as sex and sexuality, love, unknown desires, and kind of like inner darkness. And that brings it all together. I personally didn't fully understand it while I was reading it, but I don't think that's always important in poetry, especially if it's coming from someone of an entirely different background than you. Then you might not fully understand where they're coming from or what their intention is, but that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy poetry and still get more understanding from it. So I enjoyed this one, and I think it's definitely a really interesting look at poetry. So I think it could be really interesting if you want to check it out. Next, we have a book by Courtney Peppernell. Here she is. So Courtney Peppernell has written a kind of collection of poetry collections, and they're called Pillow Thoughts. The first one is called Pillow Thoughts. The second one, I think, is Mending the Mind. The third, Healing the Heart. And the fourth, Stitching the Soul. So they all carry kind of a similar theme, and they're all poetry collections that kind of work together. The way that they're structured is when you first open it up and you have like the sections, the guide, where to read, what's it called? Table of contents. When you first open up a book and it has the table of contents, then it'll have like poems for the heart, poems for a breakup, poems for missing someone, that kind of thing, that idea. So in this one, she specifically looks at heartbreak, loss, and love. So I think kind of like a nice way to read these poems is to go to that table of contents and go to the section that you are feeling at that moment, because I think that's like a great way to experience poetry. Is if you're feeling really sad or experiencing a heartbreak or just a different kind of loss that you feel deep inside, it's nice to kind of go to that section, that specifically those kinds of poems, and then read through a couple. I always really enjoyed reading this one and the other books in this collection at night before I went to bed. It's kind of nice just to, you know, feel those emotions, let it all out before you go to sleep at the end of a long day. It's kind of nice. So that's one that I personally really enjoyed, and you might as well. Next, I have a poetry collection called 19 by Mackenzie Campbell. So this is specifically a collection that the author wrote either when they were 19 or of feelings they felt when they were 19. The same kind of idea, but they're very much surrounding teenage angst and things you experience and feelings and emotions you go through when you're a teenager. Oh my God, there's a wasp outside my window. Don't come inside, you nasty little wasp. Okay, we're good. So the synopsis specifically details that it goes over heartbreak, love, loss, war, peace, and healing. So if those are topics you're interested in, and especially if you are either still near the teen years or you feel a certain way about the teen years, and it's a good little entryway, a good little door into crying. Am I right? Maybe, maybe. Yeah? Okay. So just as a little taste, you can feel the heartbreak inside the bedroom where you lost a love. You can feel the hope at the coffee shop where a beginning happened. You can feel the healing as you sit in the driver's seat in charge of your own life. So this is much more modern poetry than Ascend Descend was, for instance, but it's less oriented as Pillow Thoughts is. So you can kind of, you know, feel which area of poetry kind of sparks your interest. Next up, I'm sorry. I mean, I warned you, but we have another book by Courtney Pepper now. That is I Hope You Stay. So this one kind of deals with similar themes as Pillow Thoughts did, and it's really Courtney Pepper now exploring heartbreak and loss, but also more going towards a brighter future and hope. So that's all I can really say about it. It has a couple different types of poetry throughout it, if that makes sense. And I do believe it's split up just like her other collections. So if you're interested in just kind of more general modern poetry about life, it's a good option. Good attempt, good idea. Next up, we have Coffee Days and Whiskey Nights, and this is by Parker Lee. Parker Lee is a non-binary poet, and this is maybe their first collection. Is it their first collection? I don't think so. No. This is just their latest collection, not their first collection. They have written a couple collections before. This collection specifically has a really great juxtaposition by, just as the title suggests, Coffee Days and Whiskey Nights. So it kind of juxtaposes two different ideas that still work together throughout like the whole collection. So it showcases how much can happen in a day and how your day can just completely switch from the first sip of coffee that you have in the morning that kind of like kickstarts your day, gets you excited, you're ready to go and conquer the world, up until the whole day happens and then you hit the evening where you pour yourself a glass of whiskey and it just becomes a sad whiskey night. That kind of idea is what's present throughout. Hello? That kind of idea is what is present throughout the whole collection, and I think this one also has a really prevalent thread throughout it that says that no matter how bad your day might have been or how hopeless you might have felt at the end of it or in the middle of it or anything like that, there is the next day coming right up and you will start off with that cup of coffee. Oh, I hated that. I hated that. I hated that. God, I noticed the wind, but that was so creepy. Oh my God. Let's get a little stress ball action here. The common thread is that no matter how bad your day was, that there is another one coming. Whether or not it starts off with a cup of coffee, it is coming and it is there, and that is a fresh new day to begin. That is what I wanted to say about Coffee Days and Whiskey Nights. Next up, I have Hoodwich, and this is written by Felita Hicks. I'm just going to read the synopsis of this one because I think it explains it a lot better than I could personally. So it is a riveting debut from poet Felita Hicks, and it is a reclamation of power for Black women and non-binary people whose bodies have become the very weapons used against them. It specifically tells the story of a young person who discovers that they are, quote from the book, something that can and will survive a whole century of hunt. So this one is a whole experience to just read physically and digitally because it also has pictures throughout that connect to the poems. This is also a book that I read for my Divinatory Poetics class. It involves spirits of mothers, daughters, sex workers, and widows, and it conjures an alternate reality of their own deaths and the deaths of whom they have already lost. This collection is also kind of an intersection between mysticism and more traditional religions. So it brings together, I think, Christianity, mysticism and Afrofuturism into more urban settings and more the author's own memories and experiences. So it really just kind of brings all of these different topics and themes together to make this whole collection. There are a lot of darker topics that are mentioned throughout, specifically death, rape, and sexual assault. So if those are triggers or content warnings that you are concerned about, it's done in a very empowering way where it's kind of reclaiming one's own power of those horrific events and situations. So that's the pitch, that's the book. Definitely check it out, but just be wary of those content warnings. Next, we have another poetry collection from my Divinatory Poetics class. Yes, it's very much featured, but my professors had really good poetry collections for this class, so I just want to share them with you, you know? And that book is Monsters I Have Been by Kenji C. Liu. So this poetry collection actually has poems that are made of a really interesting structure that the other poetry collections that I've talked about in this video don't have this kind of poetry structure. If you're really interested in different poetic methods or structures, then this might definitely be something for you. This one uses the idea of the Frankenpoe, which is kind of like found poetry, kind of like blackout poetry. It's when you take different pieces from different works of literature or speeches or any kind of like written out document or something like that, and you make a poem with those. So it actually has a lot of really interesting poems that you first don't know where they have come from, but like some of them you feel are a little familiar, and then later once you get to the end of the book and the notes section, it tells you where these poems were made of. So actually it has a really interesting poem that's made up of Darth Vader's speech at some point in Star Wars and President Trump's speech, and it just kind of pulls them together into one poem, which works beautifully. Truly like art. Wow. It's really well done, and it has those with a lot of different ones all throughout, and it's basically taking these existing texts and remixing them into actual art. And it's just amazing, especially once you get to the end and you have this realization of what works you were reading. It's fantastic. You definitely check it out. All right, we have one more book from Courtney Peppernell, and that is The Road Between. So I think this is actually one of her older works, and it definitely has a different theme than the other two ones that I've talked about before in this video. So this one is still kind of like the emotional poetry, modern poetry that she was writing in the other ones, but it's more exploring the emotional sense of self while also looking at the physical sense of self and the environment that one's in. So in this collection, it's actually taking you on a kind of journey, if that makes sense. Kind of cheesy, but it's taking you on this journey from a darker place up until reaching like a moment of hope and light. Very metaphorical, but it really kind of illustrates this feeling of coming from a place that you feel lost and you feel like you don't fully know or understand yourself in that moment, and towards the end it kind of feels like coming home, you know? So it's interesting. I liked it. It's good. It's emotional. Good cry, you know, especially if you are trying to find yourself at the moment. So good stuff. All right, we're coming up towards the end, and we have Without Protection, and this is written by Gala Mukmalova. And yes, the cover is slightly terrifying. I was very concerned and hesitant when I first saw the cover. I mean, you know, yeah, it's fun. It's fun. So this is actually the last book on my list of books that I recommend from the ones we actually read for my Divinatory Poetics class. It was very good. As I said, you know, the cover throws you off, but it's actually very fantastic. So this one is talking about like internal discord and Mukmalova really going through all of the different identities that she holds within herself and what makes up her in the end. These identities include Russian, Jewish, a refugee, a New Yorker, and lesbian. So she's exploring all of those different identities in just a few pages. She also brings in Russian folklore with the Baba Yaga throughout it. So that's really interesting as she kind of displays herself within that folklore and legend. And this one also specifically has different ways in that she structures the poetry. So there are a couple ones that are structured as a Craigslist ad or as an email or as a voicemail. So that's also really interesting as a way to go through this story and kind of understand more of where she's coming from. And I think no matter who you are, whether you identify with the identities that she brings up here or if you have identities of your own, everyone has multiple different identities within themselves, no matter who they are. So I think it's a really interesting look at those personal identities and how they all come together to make up oneself. So good stuff. So those are all of the poetry books that I wanted to talk to you about today. Let me know down below if you have read any of these or if you have any recommendations for me. I'm always interested to read more poetry, so please let me know. Let me know also if you end up checking these out, and if you've made it this far in the video, if you have access to emojis, let's do a music note. Why not? If you don't have access to emojis, you can always just do parentheses, music note. Please remember to subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I have a lot more exciting content coming up, so it's all for free. Just click that subscribe button and I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely day and take care of yourself. Bye!